This is also really significant. And another area where there's some, red state like,
right.
Not sure about this one. So let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. We've had a federal judge now has stepped in to halt the Trump administration cuts to NIH research payments in 22 states. So attorneys general across the country, Democratic attorneys general, sued the Trump administration, asking them to temporarily block that major policy change. So basically what the Trump administration said is, we're just going to come in and whatever the, administrative facility costs, the overhead costs that we subsidize through the NIH, whatever that is, we're going to just cut it down to 15%. And, again, this is pretty clearly illegal based on the fact that Congress actually specifically in legislation specified that these contracts cannot be changed and shifted. Obviously, this gets back to the separation of powers, power of the purse, et cetera, et cetera. And so judge is now stepping in and saying, whoa, you cannot do this until we have this all go through the court system and figure out what is going on. So, I think also this is part of the ideological project of they know this is going to be very hard on all kinds of universities, right? They love to name check Harvard, the UC system. They'll certainly be in Johns Hopkins. They'll certainly be impacted. But it's not just these Ivy League liberal institutions that will be hurt. Any sort of university that does this type of research is definitely going to be harmed by this. And I also would say, that is not to say that there isn't, waste in there. There are reforms that could be made, et cetera, et cetera. But if you squeeze funding out on the public side and you're no longer doing nearly as much public research, guess who fills in the gap? I mean, then you become really reliant on industry funding, which means certain research is just not going to get done, things that they don't see there's going to be an immediate profit on. Like they'll fund your, innovations in Viagra research all day long. But if you're talking about some sort of illness, let's say a rare cancer, that may not be that profitable because there aren't that many people that have it, that is not going to get funded. If you're talking about something where there's a higher risk that it may not actually pan out and it's, a bit of a longer shot, that probably won't get funded. Not to mention all of the obvious problems with conflicts of interest when you have industry directly funding research. So, of all the new drug molecules that have been discovered over the past 2+ decades, all of them have come from public research dollars. They've all been linked in some way to public research dollars. So this is really, it really is important and could very much in the immediate term impact things like, developing cancer cures and all kinds of research that is very important. But like I said, I think it's pretty clearly, and Saagar, I suspect you would back me up on this, part of an ideological project to undercut universities that the Curtis Yarvins and J.D. Vances and Elon Musks of the world think sort of indoctrinate people and make them liberal and need to be effectively destroyed. In Yarvin's words, I think he said it needs to be blown up down to the atoms or something like that.
This is very Curtis.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it'll shock people. I actually agree with this one, and I'll tell you why. Is that this was specifically about those budget cuts to the quote-unquote indirect administrative cost. It capped it at 15%. My parents are in academia. Love them, but I mean, my experience in academia is extremely bureaucratic, bloated, that there are tons of make-work jobs that are just everywhere where people try to justify their existence. I mean, this is part of what we talked about with the RFK thing. I mean, one of the reasons that I am so both repulsed with the National Institute of Health is not just Dr. Fauci and I'm blanking on his name, the previous director that was at the head of that, was that it was clear that it became this slush fund of billions of federal dollars for whatever the pet projects of these top epidemiologists and infectious disease specialists wanted it to be. And they would cut these checks to all of these different labs, and then when the time came to cover up lab leak, they're the ones who came out and said, no, it's not possible, specifically to protect their own cartel of funding. Now, this is bigger than that because this is the entire National Institute of Health, but it does get to the basic question of okay, well, what have they been doing, the federal government now? This is apparently a 79-year-old project. Well, in the last 79 years, America has become more diabetic, more cancerous, fatter, more sick. I mean, what is actually happening? The healthcare costs have skyrocketed. skyrocketed. To what end are these public dollars being used? I don't disagree with what you said per se in terms of how federal dollars and all that should be spent. Much of this is a legacy of the post-World War II system where we would cut checks to these different science departments in the theory that that would eventually roll up into benefit for the American people. But I don't see it, but yes and no.
I mean, the return on investment here,
investment.
for every dollar invested, you get multiple dollars back in terms of innovation. And I mean, personally, I think a lot of this should be, instead of spun off to the pharmaceutical companies, I actually think it should be the production distribution should also be handled by the federal government. I mean, what you're pointing to is a real problem. But I would say the issue isn't because we're funding cancer research.
No,
the issue is because we have a for-profit healthcare system that profits off of people being sick. And so guess what? We have a lot of people being sick. This does nothing. I mean, this actually pushes things more in the direction of the for-profit industry-funded system where the only thing that gets developed, the only thing that gets researched is, things that have an immediate profit-generating possibility. And so, like I said before, are there things that I'm sure there are things that could be cut. But doing research properly is also really expensive.
Yeah, but why are there
administrative
costs so high, right?
Because it costs a lot of money to have these facilities, to have the specialized equipment, to be able to run the multiple trials that you need, to have the trained professionals that you need to be able to do this properly. Like, these things all cost a lot of money. And so, we do, in a certain sense, like, we subsidize this area because, look, maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I personally think like research into cancer is a good thing that we should be investing more money in. And again, if we look at the big picture, it's a freaking drop in the bucket. They're saying even with this, which is a draconian cut, I think you would agree, across the board, with a hatchet, not a scalpel.
It caps it at 15%
right,
for their
which
budget
is,
administrative costs. I mean, how many HR directors are the federal government
It's not HR directors.
But we don't know.
We're talking about specialized equipment. We're talking about the facilities that you need. You're talking about nurses. You're talking about doctors. You're talking about phlebotomists. So again, are there cuts that could be? Sure. Is this the source of federal government deficits? No.
Yes, fair.
Even with this, they're talking about a grand total of $4 billion being saved. That is like an ant on the ass of the United States federal budget deficit. It's preposterous. And so that, again, things that are investigating more rare diseases, things that have a longer timeline to development, all of this will fall by the wayside. And so, yeah, I think it's a bad idea. I also think the way they did it is illegal. And if they there's a reason that they don't go through Congress for this, and it's because it would never pass. Because if Republicans actually had to vote on stripping funds from cancer, from researching cancer cures, they would never go along with it. And I think we see some indications of that. Katie Britt down in Alabama, one of the major recipients of this type of funds is the University of Alabama at Birmingham. We could put A7 up on the screen. She expressed some very mild concern here, very, very tepid, but an indication that she was not really comfortable with it. She said she was going to work with RFK Jr. to try to, deal with these cuts and try to mitigate the damage that's being done here. University of Alabama, Birmingham has received more than $1 billion in NIH funding in recent years. Like I said before, it really is one of the top recipients. She said, quote, while the administration works to achieve this goal at NIH, a smart, targeted approach is needed in order to not hinder life-saving, groundbreaking research at high-achieving institutions like those in Alabama. This university is also a top employer in the state, very important economically, prestige-wise, et cetera, et cetera. So she's concerned about that. Tommy Tuberville, on the other hand, is all on board with it. He's not concerned.
Yeah, see, that actually kind of highlights my point, and that's part of the problem with all of this, is that these are jobs programs like NIH, and especially, no offense, Alabama, but you're incredibly reliant on the federal government in terms of spending coming in there. One of the reasons why these senators and all of them don't want to vote against it is that they create a lot of jobs in their area. And the hospitals, unfortunately, this gets to the heart of it, are some of the biggest employers in the entire United States. And you actually, if you pull the employment data, and really unfortunately, if you look at growing areas, one of the main drivers of economic growth in a lot of states that are non-technology, non-oil based is healthcare, because so many Americans are sick. So there's just there's filthy rich amount of money to be made around this. And I don't disagree with you. $4 billion is nothing, okay? And I'm sure people will clip it and make fun of you. Oh, $4 billion, how dare you say? It's like, guys, we're talking in proportions, and I understand it sounds ridiculous, but we have a $15 trillion dollar, economy, the world's largest economy in the world. I guess I'm just talking more at a principled level where it comes down to what the lab leak showed me was, again, the slush fund, the corruption for the jobs program. But at a higher level, it is important to say, what are we getting out of this? And the truth is that if anybody's getting rich or benefiting from a lot of this research, it appears to be the drug companies to me. Now, I'm not saying Trump and all these other people are going to crack down on spending for these drug companies or any of that. If anything is likely the opposite for what we're going to see out of CMS and others. I would hope that we don't. But at a principle level, I do think it is fair to say, and this is from my understanding, looking at some of Huberman's and others talk about the NIH as well, is that the current system very clearly does not seem to be working. Now, how we do that and how we change it is very important. Do I trust necessarily there's some grand arching plan? But it does seem as if there is just this runaway, not even runaway, seems to be a thoughtlessness in the way that we just cut checks to all of these different things that does not fit with a concerted strategy for the United States. So we should start with a couple of presumptions. It's like the United States it's not about cure, it's not just a cancer. It's like, well, what is causing cancer? Now, obviously there's research behind that, but as you just pointed out with the profit incentive and others, it all comes down to these crazy drugs which cost tons of money. What RFK has said, at least, and part of the reason I liked a lot of things he said for HHS was because it gets down to these chronic disease and these factors that lead to the need for all of these drugs. And it doesn't seem that all of our research or our healthcare spending is in that direction.
But the problem isn't, has been identified correctly by you, that in RFK, that these chronic diseases are literally killing us, big part of the reason our life expectancy is going down, et cetera, et cetera. But the purported solution here will only make that issue worse by pushing things away from public funding and towards private industry funding. If you actually want to deal with that, if you're actually serious about dealing with that, you have to deal with the fact of the profit motive being at the center of our healthcare system. That is the root of all of this. I mean, and that's why it's, we're the only developed country that doesn't have universal healthcare, and we get horrible results because it is profitable for people to be sick. So while I totally agree with your diagnosis of the problem, this purported solution, pretty clearly to me, makes things worse because at least, with the public research, as I said before, every new drug molecule that's been discovered has been publicly funded research. Okay, the private industry, what counts for research and development there is literally figuring out how to game the patent system so that they can extend their patent monopolies on whatever their most profitable product is. That's what counts for research and development over there. So with this sort of change, you're pushing things more in that direction. And this is again sort of the Elon anarcho-capitalist ideological direction. And he's said outright, he wants to privatize the entire federal government. His ideal utopian state is that there are no public sector workers, that they're all quote unquote higher productivity private sector workers. Well, we know there are certain things that if they're not profitable, the private sector is just not going to do. And certain things that are really important that the American people count on and depend on that have to be housed under the federal government. So I see it very much in the direction of mass privatization of public resources, and I see it very much in the direction of just trying to use whatever cudgel you can to undercut the university system. Not to mention that, listen,
see, that's where I have no sympathy for them.
I'm sure you don't, but I mean that you have to not that is part of the ideological project here.
Yes.
So the other piece is the way they did it is brazenly illegal. And so if you want to cut the, research for cancer and other disease funds, you have to go through Congress. You have to go through Congress. It's really quite simple. Not only because these grants have already been written, it's literally in the law. And actually, we can put A9 up on the screen because this was pointed out by Susan Collins was the other person. So she's objecting to the move to cut the NIH She told Robert F. Kennedy about her strong opposition to arbitrary cuts. I think she's still voting for him, though. But she said she called him to express her strong opposition to these arbitrary cuts in funding for vital research at our main institutions, which are known for their excellence. He's promised as soon as he's confirmed, he'll re-examine this initiative that was implemented prior to his confirmation. And if you think that RFK is going to be running the show, I mean, I think it's pretty clear who is holding the reins in the federal government right now, our new CEO, Dictator King. But in any case, there's specific legislative language that says pretty directly, like, once these funds go out, you cannot change the ratios or the nature of the contracts that we've signed and agreed to with these institutions. So, I object to it on principle because I think it's a foolish place to cut. I think it leaves us worse off in terms of health. I think it pushes things more in the direction of private industry, et cetera. But I also think it's brazenly illegal, which is what the court case obviously is about, and why the courts have, this hasn't reached a final decision yet, but why the courts have come in and said, whoa. You cannot go forward with this until this goes through litigation and we figure out what's going on.
Oh, yeah, it's already been shut down. The NIH director, Jay Bhattacharya, actually still has not been confirmed in the Senate. And as I understand it, this is something that they're going to try and put into the legislation. I mean, look, I actually would be curious, because what I want to know is how exactly you spent 60% on administrative budgets. Because from what I was reading, it seems that the 60% to 15, what they were claiming in terms of what we cut, they cited some of the things that you did. But it's like, well, how much of this, though, is administrative cost? Because that's one of those where if you look at overall growth in healthcare spending, it's not just about the cost of services. A huge reason why so many of our bills are so high is directly tied to so many of these hospital administration costs. It's not one-to-one. I'm just giving an example of, like, it's clear that quote-unquote administrative costs has become a huge segment of spending, and that there just seems to be this endless money printer from the federal government for a lot of this stuff. So we could get back to just funding research or whatever. I'd be totally fine. Not even that. We just need a concerted national strategy. And I'll give it to you. It's true. I mean, I don't feel like there's, some great big hand on the wheel. And that's probably the big difference from how this program and all of that was originally conceived. It's part of the reason why the instinct today is to cut. It's just simply, it's like better than just simply funding a bunch of make work jobs and all that. But,
I would say the instinct is to cut, because that is Elon's specific ideological ANCAP project, to render the federal government effectively irrelevant, small, unable to check him and his ambitions. Like, that is his ideological project. And so he'll use whatever truly legitimate problems there are to justify accomplishing his goal of stripping the federal government down to the bones in all areas you'd agree with, areas you wouldn't agree with, et cetera. He will, he'll say Social Security is full of fraud, that's why we have to cut entitlements. He'll say Medicare, Medicaid, also full of fraud, that's why we have to cut entitlements. Obviously with this one, NIH, this is preposterous, these administrative overhead. It's all a push towards privatization. It's a push towards stripping down the government. It's a push towards, and we can see this in some of the agencies that he specifically targeted that have investigated him or gone after his business interests, or that are just simply strategic in terms of making the case that, like, we can just cut an entire agency like USAID and not involve Congress, and it's perfectly fine. So, to me, it's about his overall ideological project that he is pursuing because, he's decided that he should be king.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. All right, let's get to Gaza. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.